Taking control of the car buying experience. Demand the most for your money. Here's the Car Buyer Advisor.
We have an illustrious guest list today. Some of the finest businesses in our nation live right here amongst us in Northern Nevada. I'd like to welcome to our show Tom Hauptman with DriveLine and Gear Service of Reno. Welcome, Tom.
Good morning, Mitch. How are you?
Good, thank you. And on the phone with us, unable to navigate the roads because of the extreme amount of snow at his house, but here with us on the phone, Tom O'Donnell with Preferred Auto Care. Tom, welcome.
Thank you, Mitch.
Thanks for joining us. The weather today is going to be a good part of our topic today. For those in our community that want to be able to call in and ask Tom or Tom a question, it's the Tom and Tom show today here on the Car Buyer Advisor. The phone number again is going to be 775-823-1920. Real quick, gentlemen, if you would, tell us a little bit about your businesses. We'll start with Tom Hauptman with DriveLine and Gear.
Well, Mitch, we started DriveLine service in 1971 as a DriveLine shop only. There was a need because no one specialized in drive lines. So after doing the drive shaft industry for 6 or 7 years, we decided to go into the gear industry. So we became DriveLine and Gear Service. I started working for DriveLine Service in 1978, sweeping floors. It's been a long journey, but now I own the place and I still sweep floors dang near every day. So we're been in business for, we're reaching on, I can't even add that much, 40 years.
A really long time.
Yes.
And
you've
been there the entire time, the grandfather of drive lines in Northern Nevada. And then Tom with Preferred Auto Care, a little bit about your organization as well.
Oh, we're Honda, Toyota, Subaru, Acura, and Lexus experts. We've been in business here in Sparks for almost 23 years, and we're experts on the cars. So,
specialist would translate into experts after decades. Not quite as long as the other Tom here, but definitely the grandfather of Honda, Toyota, Acura, Lexus, and Subaru in our community as well. The topic today is really going to be a lot about cars and this time of the year, what's happening to them. So, Tom, I'd like you to start, if you would. Let's talk about what's happening to batteries this time of the year.
Well, batteries right now, this time of year, we're having cold temperature swings. And typically a battery, if it's just your normal 70 degrees out, it lasts forever. But as soon as you get temperature swings, either hot or cold, if they're even close to being bad, they'll just drop out and the batteries just die. The other thing you have to make sure you do, too, is the corrosion usually attacks the positive battery cable more than the negative. And if you do replace your battery or have your battery replaced, make sure that positive cable gets replaced. The positive cable's got two different leads going in it. One goes directly to the starter, and then one goes to the electrical system of the car for your body, for the lights and all that other stuff. And what can happen is, people don't know it, but that if the positive part that goes down to your starter is no good, you can try to crank it over. Well, it'll click, but the starter won't even turn over. So you have to make sure you check those cables.
Oh, that's great advice. Are you seeing a lot of that too, Tom?
Yes, here in the last week or 10 days, even at my shop, and we don't specialize in batteries. I do stock them just for this reason, but the battery has to be in good shape for the rest of the vehicle to operate properly. The low voltage is a big cause for a lot of problems, not only electrical but four-wheel drive problems. A lot of these vehicles nowadays use electric shift motors to shift your transfer case in and out of four-wheel drive, and with a low voltage or a bad battery, it doesn't work.
That's the same on the cars that we work on. That'll make engine lights come on. We've seen it before where it'll actually make the alarm go off while they're driving. It does all kinds of weird stuff.
And one other issue that people don't really think about is in this Northern Nevada extreme weather, a lot of people go out and play. They go out Christmas tree cutting, they go out skiing, they go out hunting. And in the backcountry, it can be pretty extreme. And if you turn your truck off and you're 30 miles from the nearest highway out chucker hunting, you go to start it up. Now, instead of an inconvenience, it turns into a survival deal. It can very well be, very, very, very important to keep your cars in good working order. And your battery's probably the easiest to keep in good working order.
Well, and there's an inspection that you gentlemen can perform as well, just to check a battery before they have that problem.
Yeah, we have a tester that will test it electronically. It tells you approximately how many cold cranking amps remain in the battery. And then we also have another tester which actually will put the load on it, because occasionally the electronic tester, it'll show it's good, but you have questions. You're going, well, it doesn't act like it's good, so then you'll take out the other machine and you'll actually do a load test on it.
Some of these batteries that you can buy, they say 3-year, 5-year, 7-year batteries. Well, again, like Tom just mentioned, in a perfect world, in a 70-degree world, a 7-year battery should last 7 years. But in this climate, if you can get 3 or 4 years out of a 7-year battery, that is about the average, especially in this kind of conditions.
Now, I had an experience once a couple of years back where my car went into limp mode. It wouldn't go over 10 miles an hour. So these can actually cause, like you said, drivability issues as well. I want to get into a little bit of this time of the year with the weather. I mean, we're seeing now snow, and in some cases, in some areas, snow drifts in the feet. I think we had as much as 10 feet or better up at the over the Donner Summit last night. So this is a real important conversation as well as four-wheel drives this time of the year and making sure they're operating properly.
Well, the four-wheel drive systems have changed so much over the years. We talked before about the old style where you had to get out of your truck, turn in your hubs to lock, pull your transfer case lever into lock, and off you go. That is long, long gone. Right? There's very, very, very few vehicles manufactured today that have a system even close to that. Most of the systems now are, like I mentioned, they're shift motor controlled, push button on the dash. You push the button, you hear a little click, and off you go. And then there's all-wheel drive systems that you don't do anything. There's nothing in your car. It just senses wheel slippage. If you start to slip in the rear, it transfers power to the front. So your four-wheel drive system is very, very complicated now. We were running into stuff that even as a specialist shop that we struggle to understand, and because it's so new. Some of the all-wheel drive systems are tied into every part of your car. They're tied into your anti-lock brake system. They're tied into your traction control system. They're tied into your electronics on your open door. If your door is left ajar, your four-wheel drive won't work. So there's a lot to a four-wheel drive system nowadays than there used to be.
Well, you're probably seeing this time of the year, too, a lot of people that really maybe haven't even serviced their four-wheel drives in a few years. They didn't even know they had service requirements. Are you seeing some of that? And then people that go out the first time to use it and finally find out it's not working.
Yeah, Tom, in your shop, the Subarus, I'm not even sure how a Subaru transfer case works. We get this question, Subarus and some of the Toyota CVT transmissions and stuff, but in our world, the four-wheel drive world, the first time it snows, and it can be like 3 snowflakes out there, our shop just gets hammered with phone calls. My four-wheel drive isn't working. My four-wheel drive isn't working, and a lot of it is electrical. Some of it is mechanical. There's a lot of stuff. We just had a Yukon Denali in this last week that he called me, customer called me and says, my four-wheel drive isn't working. He was spinning his rear tires on the ice, and there was no power going to his front wheels. Well, after 3 hours of trying to figure this one out, it all came down to, like I said, the ABS system was inoperating. And what happens on those is the ABS system has to be operating because it will actually slow your rear tires down from spinning and allow the transfer case to transfer the torque to the front end. So all system has to work, but very difficult to diagnose and very difficult to know if it is working or not.
Tom, are you seeing an increase in the number of four-wheel drive failures this time of the year at your shop?
We really haven't.
That's a testimonial to buy a Honda, Toyota, Acura, Subaru, or Lexus, Tom. Is that what you're saying?
Most of the vehicles that we do work on, they're all-wheel drives, and the all-wheel drives, as long as they service them regularly, they usually don't have any issues. Now, we occasionally have, like Tom said, the four-wheel drives that are electronic, and 99% of the time when we have a four-wheel drive issue, it is an electrical problem. It might be an actuator, it might be a switch, it might be a solenoid, but most of the time it's electrical.
Well, sometimes I've asked you before, so, when we talk about a topic for this show, to talk about particular failures on a vehicle that we can advise our community about, I say, well, Tom, what's failing in your shop? And you go, nothing, all we're doing is regular maintenance, it seems.
Sometimes it's that way.
Well, one of the things that we wanted to touch on today, and folks, if you have a question about any of these systems we're talking about or any question regarding your car, feel free to give us a call at 775-823-1920. Tom and Tom will be happy to take your calls. One of the things we wanted to talk about is this time of the year as well. It's very important, that you have your four-wheel drive in order, but that once you get going, it's probably equally as important that you can bring that vehicle back down to a stop. So let's talk about the braking systems, because that's a huge thing this time of the year, in this weather especially.
Well, one of the biggest complaints that we have is brake vibration. When you apply your brakes, the vehicle shakes. It's more prominent at highway speeds going down hills, believe it or not. And what it can be caused by a couple different things is rotor variation in thickness and actually the rotors being warped. And what that causes is when you apply the brakes, the caliper squeezes on the rotor, on the brake pads would squeeze on the rotor, and because it's either out of round or thickness varies, the vibration goes up into the steering wheel. And so what you have to do is you have to machine the rotors. Now, when you machine the rotors, the best way to machine the rotors is actually with the machine you mount on the car, because this way it trues it to the vehicle. Lots of times what will happen is some places will take the rotor off, put it in a machine, then they turn it on the machine. Well, they just trued that rotor to the machine instead of the vehicle. And usually, typically, about 3 months later, it starts shaking again. So,
well, we've had this conversation before, too. Tom, you had something you wanted to add. I'm sorry.
Well, I was just going to say some of the on-the-car brake lathes and on-the-car wheel balancers, the road force wheel balancers, they're all, I would say, and don't quote me on this, but I would say they're 80% effective. There are some vehicles out there that you cannot machine on the vehicle. So you have to go old school way if that's a word. You have to have them machined off the vehicle and your tires balanced off the vehicle, because the road force balance, we've run into it numerous times that a vibration still can be tire related, even if it was a road force balance on the vehicle. So it's not a cure all, but it is better than, on most vehicles, it's better than the old school way.
One of the things I wanted to review is, and we've had this conversation before, I think one of the things that crawls under my skin in our industry is overselling. Service departments, techniques to increase shop tickets, and selling things that are not necessary. In the braking system, we see this all the time. There are organizations and large national companies that will not do a brake job on your car unless you replace the calipers. Now, we've had this conversation. There are times where maybe that may be absolutely necessary, but for the vast majority of the time, it is a upsell profit center for these businesses. So, Tom, this is something that you're passionate about too. So I'll let you discuss the calipers in the braking system, what they do, how they work, and how they can be serviced as well.
Well, a brake caliper is basically a hydraulic ram. And what you do is when you step on the brake pedal, it pushes up the hydraulic ram, which pushes on the brake pads, which actually squishes the brake rotor, which slows down the vehicle. Now, the calipers themselves, they're basically nothing but a hydraulic ram or hydraulic piston. Now, when you do a brake job, if you properly service the caliper, basically the caliper will last the life of the vehicle. I mean, you got slides, you got rubber boots. Some of them have little bushings inside. We've seen in the past where some of the Hondas, they have a little rubber bushing on the pin itself. And I've seen it before where people use petroleum grease on that bushing. And what that does is that little rubber bushing will swell up. When it swells up, you'll apply your brakes, and the brakes won't release because it's too tight inside the slide. So you have to make sure you use, the proper silicone lubricants. When you do service them, you have to check the boots, make sure the boots are in good condition. And as long as it's properly serviced, I mean, it'll last the life of the vehicle. Well, not all the time, but in most cases, it'll last the life of the vehicle. And we've seen it way too many times where some of these places, they'll replace the calipers, and that, to me, that's overselling because they don't really need them. And then what happens is most of the calipers in our business that we've ever replaced were leaking, and what it was an aftermarket caliper that somebody had stuck on the car. I'm not saying aftermarket's bad, but it was poor quality aftermarket.
Well, and that's what I heard. You rarely have ever in 20 years replaced a brake caliper that's failed on an original manufacturer equipment.
That's right.
It's
very rarely.
It happens, but it is. So the concept of having to change your calipers every brake job, it really occurs to me as an upsell. And
we've seen it before where they told the customer that the reason they were going to replace the brake calipers is because they says, if we don't replace the brake calipers, you won't get as many miles on your brake pads as you did originally. Well, his first set of brake pads, he got like 35,000, which is a little abnormal. They usually last, on that particular vehicle he was driving, they usually last about 40 or 45,000, so he's a little hard on them, but he got 35,000 on them, so they put the new calipers on. The second set, he only got 27,000 miles on it. And I says, well, what happened to that? You just stay with quality parts and do it right, and you won't have any problems.
Well, I think there's an underlying conversation we'll have when we get back from our break about dealing with shops with integrity that will not sell you an inferior part on top of selling you something you don't need. We're talking to Tom O'Donnell with Preferred Auto Care, specialist in Honda, Toyota, Acura, Subaru, and Lexus, and Tom Haltman with DriveLine and Gear Service here in Northern Nevada. Again, feel free to call in and ask these gentlemen any questions you have about your car. The call-in number is 775-823-1920, and we're going to pick up that conversation right after this brief break. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. And thanks for staying with us through that brief break. Again, if you were here before the break, we're talking to Tom O'Donnell, owner of DriveLine and Gear, Tom O'Donnell, owner of Preferred Auto Care, and Tom Haltman, owner of DriveLine and Gear. It's the Tom and Tom show here on the Car Buyer Advisor today. And we were just talking a little bit about batteries, cold weather, all-wheel drive systems, braking systems, and we just before the break had started to touch on, dealing with shops with integrity that don't oversell. And guys, I mean, this is the probably number one reason why the two of you are part of our elite group. It's business ethics. Let's talk a little bit about your take on the industry as a whole and your way of doing business that our community needs to understand exists in these industries.
Well, Mitch, as the owner of DriveLine Service, that's a real tough thing that we do every day. Where do you draw the line? You talk about upsell. Where do you draw the line as far as safety, as far as what the car needs, as far as how much money the customer is willing to spend? What's he looking for? Is he looking to make it to the next paycheck, or is he looking to fix his car up for the long haul? It's a tough line to deal with, because I mean, I can take an older vehicle. In this economy, people are keeping their cars for a long time. It's not uncommon to see cars and trucks in our shop with 200, 250, 300,000 miles. And if you look at a vehicle with 300,000 miles, and if you put it under a microscope, oh my goodness, we can find a lot of stuff that needs to be dealt with. I had an older Ford in just yesterday, and I kind of touched on the customer. I says, well, what's your plans with this vehicle? Are you going to keep it, or are you trying to get by? Because I could find $5,000 worth of work, and it was nothing major. It needed drive shafts. It needed front axle U-joints. It needed tube seals. It needed bearings in the rear. I mean, every place we looked, we could find something that this vehicle needed. And as a customer, you tell them it's going to be $800 to fix, let's just say, the drive shafts. Well, if he isn't prepared for that $5,000 bill, and he thinks you've just fixed his truck for $800, and next week his axle U-joint falls off, you didn't fix the truck completely, but he thinks you did. So you really got to be upfront with the customer, and you really have to have some conversation that lets him know what kind of shape his vehicle's in. At this particular customer, we divided it up in we call it a par 3. It's like, well, let's do this month, and Y next month, and Z the following month, and to get the truck back to a good quality where he was happy with it. But in this economy, it's tough, because a lot of times we triple the value of the vehicle with our repairs. So,
well, Tom, we also have seen historically, some of these franchise and non-franchise businesses. Nothing here we ever say here is a blanket statement, but that actually have quote specials, or what we call, I like to refer to as service drive specials, that maybe somebody doesn't need, but they're bonus oriented volume incentive basis for service salespeople to earn extra commissions. And that sometimes these are some of the problems with our industry, is that they start looking at their personal paycheck and not really the customer's needs.
Yeah, that's a real bad thing to do. Padding your paycheck, I mean, that's one of the worst, things that can happen. That's just not right. It's like Tom said, when we get higher mileage cars, I mean, if they've been properly maintained throughout the history, I mean, we've got cars with over 400,000, and there's really nothing wrong with them. But when you do get them, you do what Tom says. You say, here's what you need, and you'll do, well, this part this time, and then this part this time, and get it back up to where it belongs. Because not everybody maintains their cars like they should. We've got lots of cars with over 300,000 miles, and they're still very dependable. And then on the other hand, we have people that they might need $1,300 worth of work, and they'll say, well, I'm going to replace the car. Well, $1,300 is what, 2, 3, 4 car payments? And I'm thinking, well, $1,300, you put $1,300 in this car, basically all you have to do is change the oil and rotate the tires basically for the next 3 years. I mean, it's hard to, but you can't just tell them outright, so you just try to talk to them and convince them that maybe that would be the better way to go.
Well, one of the things that I love in your shop is you don't employ service salespeople. They come to your shop, and if there's something that needs to be done, they're going to hear that directly from you. And this is a big deal, because it's at the core of what makes your business such an extraordinary business, Tom, that you won't allow somebody to upsell your customer with unnecessary services. No,
we won't do that. In fact, we'll do things like where a normal shop would say, well, you need front brakes. And I'll say, well, my say will be, you have about 10% left on your front brakes. then we'll say, well, when was the last set of brakes done? Well, if the last set of brakes was done was 50,000 miles ago, then basically they have about 5,000 miles left on their brakes. So he says, you could probably wait till next oil change. We'll do that. We won't hard sell anybody, and it's their decision. And the other thing is they have to keep in mind too is the quality of parts. Probably 60% of the job is the parts that you're using on the vehicle. If the factory part goes 150,000 miles, don't you want the same part back on there?
Well, you even mentioned this in the braking systems. Parts choices is really essential, but really, I think people are sometimes so price sensitive that with the innovation of the internet, they're out there price shopping and they see brake jobs for $39 an axle or something, and they think that a brake job's a brake job, and nothing can be farther from the truth.
Oh, Tom probably really sees that with aftermarket Chinese parts or something.
Yeah, we have a very extensive inventory, drivetrain inventory, probably the largest in northern Nevada, and Northern California. Again, I think it is education. It's consumer education. Yes, the internet, you can find some good deals. We were talking about it the other day. If it's an apple, and you know exactly what you want, and there's no service along with this part or product you want, you can find a good deal on the internet. But if you don't know, you need to talk to someone who does. And we spend a lot of time trying to educate the consumer, our customers. And we can put 10 different U-joints on the counter from $4 to $30. At first, when they first come in and they don't know our shop, I would say 90% of the people will take the $4 one because they're all the same. A U-joint's a U-joint. And by the time we're done educating them and letting them know what the differences are, a lot of them will take the higher quality U-joints, but they just don't know. And I think as an industry, it's up to us to do the educating. Tom, you say that it's up to the customer. Well, yeah, the last say is the customer, and a lot of it is price-based, but it's up to us to educate them, and I think trust is a big issue in this industry.
Well, in my shop, I won't even use those other parts. When I say it's their decision for the repairs, but I'm going to use quality parts only.
Yes, I know that because I know you.
And that's why you're one of the truly elite businesses that we've asked to represent this show for our community's education. One of the things, Tom, with DriveLine that you've had talked about before about these inferior parts is people that would bring in their own parts to you and ask you to put them on in this bucket that you had to start to keep to show them what happens when they use those inferior parts.
Yeah, we had a 5-gallon bucket with broken U-joints, and I won't mention the country they came from, but I said, yeah, I'll put them in, but you want me to put them in this bucket or in your drive shaft because this is what they'll end up like, and truly there are some good aftermarket parts, and we do sell aftermarket parts, but we spend a lot of time and effort and money, and we've got 40 years experience in what the best parts, whether it be OE or aftermarket, that we can use, and they're not the cheapest, but they are definitely the best.
All right. Well, and I love that about both of your businesses. I want to get into one of the most common things that people see, and it's, I don't know. I think there should be other lights on automobiles today other than this one light because it entices probably high blood pressure, heart failure, and anxiety in most people when it comes on is that dreaded check engine light. And it doesn't always mean it's your engine. And that's why I say there should probably be 100 other lights. So it could tell you, oh, this is your emissions, this is your transmission, because these check engine lights are really the whole systems of cars. So let's talk about, the check engine lights and some common misdiagnosis associated with them as well.
Well, one of the biggest issues with engine lights is a lot of people think all you do is hook a machine up and you automatically know what's wrong. Well, that can't be farther from the truth. They have code readers, which basically, if you go to some of these auto parts stores, they'll read the codes. Well, when they read the codes, they usually print out like a possibility of what it is, and there's usually 5 average probably 5 different things it could be. It has to be diagnosed. And some people will, say it's your catalytic converter, and they say, well, I've got 6 more months before I have to smog it, and so I'm going to wait. But the bad thing is you keep driving around with the engine light on. If something else is going on, they'll never know because the light doesn't come on twice. The light just stays on all the time. And the other thing with a lot of these all-wheel drives is when that engine light is on, it disables the vehicle stability control, the VSC system, the TCS system, and so that won't be working. And this time of year, you could get stuck just because the engine light's on.
Yeah, that Denali that we worked on this last week, we set the scan tool up and we brought up the codes, and it had 2 different codes, codes we hadn't seen before. So we got on all data and we pulled them up, and we had to call all data because their system didn't explain it very well. Well, before it was done, they had faxed us 108 pages of instructions on how to get to the bottom of these 2 codes, and it ended up to be the ABS system control. And it has, again, it's the check. It wasn't a check engine light, but it was a service 4-wheel drive light, and 108 pages to get to the bottom of it. So it's not as easy as setting the scan tool up and saying, do this or replace this part, because it doesn't work like that.
Well, one of the things, too, is the, common misdiagnosis. You mentioned these scan tools, but then, even when people have these tools that read farther into a system, sometimes I think the most common misdiagnosed one would be around the emission systems, around these EGR systems, where the code says that it's a catalytic converter, for an example.
Well, actually, probably the most common code is an evaporative system control fail code. And it's 90% of the time, well, actually probably 99% of the time, it's either a bad gas cap or a loose gas cap. A lot of the manufacturers now in the newer vehicles, they actually have a gas cap light. That they've improved it enough to where it actually has its own little light. EGR systems are common. Misfires are common. One of the problems with EGR is it'll say if they go to an auto parts store and it's a P0401 EGR flow, and the first thing they do is they sell them an EGR valve. Well, EGR flow, yes, but what it is 99% of the time is the EGR is exhaust gas recirculation, and some of the exhaust gases get recirculated back into the engine through the intake manifold. And over years, what happens is the intake manifold gets plugged up with carbon. Well, so when it finally gets plugged up with carbon, you have no EGR flow. So the cure is you have to clean out the intake manifold or replace the intake manifold. A lot of people, they just get this idea that, here's another example, misfires, misfire codes P0300, 301, 302, etc. On the Hondas, if you had a misfire, say on cylinder number 2, it'll come up with the misfire, just the misfire 300. Then it'll come up with 301, 302, 303. For some reason, if you have a misfire in one of the cylinders, it shows that you have misfires in a lot of the cylinders, and it's 99% of the time it's only caused by one cylinder. So you do have to get it checked out. You have to have it scanned, and you actually run a misfire check on it on a lab scope.
Well, and this is the advantage of dealing with specialists in a particular vehicle. You have the technology, the equipment, the experience to know, it's not all of these. You don't have to replace all of your spark plugs because it's saying there's a misfire in all of your cylinders. You have to have the equipment, take the time, diagnose it correctly, and then really get to the root of the problem. Our producer has a question I'd like to share. I think it's a great question. Michelle?
Yes, I'm wondering, all of a sudden the low tire pressure warning light came up on my dash, but just when it got cold. And I'm going to obviously check all 4 of them and see if one of them's a little low, but they look okay. I'm wondering if it's common for lights like that to come on when the weather changes.
It's very common. What happens is when you have, you fill up your tires, say, when it was 70 degrees outside. Well, when it gets cold, the air pressure in the tire drops. And so when it drops, the computer system says, hey, we don't have enough air in one of the tires or two of the tires, and it makes the warning light come on to let you know to check your tire pressures. And some of them are equipped with the sensor in the spare tire too. So always make sure you check your spare tire too.
Thank you. That's great advice. I have never heard that before about the spare.
Yeah.
Yeah, and back on this tire deal, tire size is a huge factor in today's four-wheel drive. I have bulletins, TSBs, that's a technical service bulletin from the dealerships and from some of the manufacturers that your tires can only be less than 3/16 of an inch difference in height from the ground to the top of the tire from front to rear, because the systems that sense wheel slippage thinks that you're slipping when you're going down the highway at 60, 70 miles an hour. The rear tires are running, let's just say 100 feet, and the front tires are running 101 feet and per revolution or per 10 revolutions, whatever, and that will definitely heat up the transfer case, heat up the front differential. It causes all sorts of problems. So very, very, very important to keep all tires the same diameter.
Well, and tire pressure can cause diameter changes, not just tire wear.
Absolutely. Tire pressure. We see it a lot on your littler vans, your Astro vans and some of the smaller vans. People like to use them for delivery vehicles. Well, I've seen there's a company here in town that uses Astro vans as plumbing trucks. Well, they have 2,500 pounds of plumbing fixtures and tools in the back, and it's an all-wheel drive van, and they do not compensate with air pressure. And unfortunately, the rear tires are squished and the front tires are not. It looks, it's running down the road with the front end high, and they burn up the front differential. We've seen it dozens of times.
We've had an occasion on one time we had a car towed in because it wouldn't move. The tires were so much in size difference. It was an all-wheel drive. They were so much difference in size that it wouldn't move. The car wouldn't move. You lift it up in the air, they all work fine.
Well, and real quick, before we run out of time here, this time of the year, I think it's important that we do touch on the viscosities changes in because of the temperature, with some recommendations on scheduled maintenance and some of the most commonly missed services that this time of the year, like the four-wheel drive. I think it's probably one of the most underserviced parts of a car.
Yes, we see a lot of times every vehicle, whether it be Ford, Dodge, Chevy, Honda, Toyota, as far as the drivetrain goes, they all have their own idiosyncrasies. We see the GMs. There's a pump inside the transfer case that wears a hole in the case. Well, it happens so slowly and it dribbles out so slowly that before you know it, you have a catastrophic failure. The Fords have electronic issues with their control modules. With, like I say, a door that's ajar affects your transfer case. The Toyotas, some of the shift motors in the Toyotas, they fail, and it's a very expensive fix on the Toyota Tacomas. So all of them have an issue. Service is a big deal. If you would have caught that General Motors transfer case, if you would have had it serviced and the oil was low, you could have saved yourself a couple $1,000. We're seeing some of the Toyotas with the all-wheel drives, their little transfer case or their all-wheel drive unit is leaking. Well, that only holds a quart of oil, and it doesn't take long to leak out a quart of oil. Very expensive. That's a $3,500, $4,000 repair, and some of these vehicles are not worth it. So, yes, any part of the vehicle is important to service, but I think you need to pay attention to the entire vehicle. So that's my take, because I don't do engines. I mean, somewhere in there's a place to put oil in, and I'm not sure where it is, but I do drivetrain. So I leave the engines and stuff up to Tom.
That's Tom Hauptman, owner of DriveLine and Gear Service here in Reno on Glendale, and Tom O'Donnell with Preferred Auto Care over on Gregg Street in Sparks. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us today. I appreciate you being here, and especially in light of the weather, joining us for today's show.
Thank you very much.